The thing that I don't think I understood, and this goes for all of those constituents, whether it's investors or it's partners or it's your employees, is you have to repeat that vision over and over and over again. And it's not just repeating the vision, but it's the how we're going to achieve that vision. Probably for the first 4 to 5 years, I found that very, very frustrating. Kind of the same level of frustration that I had when I worked in corporate. And it was kind of like you had to go get 18 people to agree to something to actually make a decision.
Welcome back to Life from Within. I'm your host, Kelly Dwyer. Today, I'm so happy to have Darrin Murriner with us, co-founder and CEO of Cloverleaf. Cloverleaf is a technology platform. I'm a customer, by the way, and it brings automated team coaching into the flow of everyday work through tools like Calendar, email, Slack, and Microsoft Teams. It helps people collaborate better, strengthen working relationships, and build more engaged teams. Before starting Cloverleaf, Darrin spent 15 years in the corporate world with roles at Munich Re, Arthur Andersen, and Fifth Third Bank. He's also the author of Corporate Bravery and Thrive, 2 books focused on helping organizations build cultures that can grow and adapt in the face of change and uncertainty. Darrin, welcome. I'm so glad you're here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm curious, you're building your company in Cincinnati. Is that right?
That's correct.
Was there a specific reason why you chose to locate in Cincinnati?
Other than we're just a huge fan of Cincinnati. I've lived here now for about 25 years. Kirsten, my co-founder, grew up here, went to high school here, met her after having moved to Cincinnati. But it's honestly just a great city. If you're a fan of the show, The Good Place, one of the things they said is like, why can't we go to a medium place like Cincinnati? And so I think it has a little bit of a reputation of like, oh, I've heard of Cincinnati, but I've never really been there. But it's actually an amazing city. Thriving sports and arts community, really great place to build a business and grow a business. Yeah, I can't complain about it.
My mother grew up in Cincinnati. So I spent my early childhood, we'd get in the Buick station wagon and road trip out there from the East Coast.
That's awesome.
Nice. So you spent 15 years in corporate. Bring us to the moment where you woke up to the realization that you couldn't do corporate anymore and you needed to become an entrepreneur.
I think over those 15 years, I found myself being frustrated a lot. I think by the bureaucracy and lack of ability to make decisions. I think some of those frustrations all got summarized a bit in the book Corporate Bravery. I think a lot of what I saw that delayed decision-making, that delayed forward progress, momentum in a lot of the businesses that not only that I worked in, but also consulted with over the years was really people being held back by fear and, oftentimes pretty irrational fears at that, which is funny coming from somebody who started their career in risk management. But I do think that was just a really predominant theme. It wasn't like an overnight thing. I've sensed the frustration, just kind of felt like that's what happens in business. The bigger the organization, the harder it is to kind of get things done. I think it was really over time that I got to a place where, one, I understood that I was an entrepreneur. I just really had a hard time embracing that label or that descriptor for it. It took about 15 years to really get to the point where I was like, hey, I'm kind of tired of building for other people. And I think I can do this, better, faster, more effectively if I struck out on my own. And I didn't really know what that was going to look like initially. It took me a year or two to figure out, to kind of land on Cloverleaf. But yeah, it was just a long period of discovery that probably took way too long and was probably pretty obvious for people who knew me.
I'm assuming you weren't just a cog in the wheel in those corporate jobs. You were actually doing some intrapreneurial type of activities. Was that true or no?
Yeah, I mean, I would say maybe the first 2 years I was a cog, right? I mean, anytime you start your career, entry-level positions, you're learning, you're growing, you're kind of getting to a place where you can contribute more. Honestly, very early on, so I was at Arthur Andersen. I was there during Enron, which for those that maybe tend towards the older end of the spectrum on this, that listen to this podcast, will understand that. For those that are younger, maybe I'll have to go look that up. But Arthur Andersen was the auditor for Enron at the time and kind of got to live through this period, which, was a really scary place to be 2 years into your career, where 85,000 person accounting firm just disappeared overnight. And, through that process, one of the things that we did is became a group, which was about 700 people of those 85,000, broke off and started its own brand underneath the Robert Half umbrella. And at the time, I was on a career path and kind of felt like the last thing I want to be doing is building stuff, because I was looking at this career path and career trajectory that I wanted to be on. But that was the first place. And then from there, it was just everything that I was doing, there was a lot of building that was associated with it. And I really just enjoyed that and started to notice and identify over time, whether it was creating new products or it was stepping into a place where we were growing businesses and developing new approaches and new ways of doing things, that's where I got the biggest sense of satisfaction, was building. And at one point, somebody referenced me as being a builder, like used that terminology. And I was like, oh, I like that terminology more than I like entrepreneur. And for lots of reasons, but other things that I hear often is creator. And that I feel like is a little bit more on the creative end of the spectrum, right? Like if you're an artist or you're a musician or something. And so that didn't really resonate as much as being a builder. And that was something that as I continued to build, and when there weren't opportunities to build, I would find myself getting distracted and doing things on the side. So my wife and I started a business that turned into 2 different businesses, of which we sold both over the years. But those were like side projects for me. And it kind of kept me, when I wasn't building in a corporate context, I could still build outside of that. And again, another kind of indicator that like, hey, there's something here that I probably need to be spending more of my time doing. All of those things really kind of contributed to the place where it was very clear that I needed to step out and do something on my own.
At that time, builder resonated much more than entrepreneur. What about that word entrepreneur, what you thought it meant? Like, what about it didn't resonate with you? Because there are a lot of people listening who have dreams of starting something of their own, but they might be getting caught up in their head around this concept of entrepreneur.
I think it's a loaded term, right? I mean, I think oftentimes people, when they hear entrepreneur, they think of like a tech startup or something like that. I mean, anybody who's doing something on their, either on their own or as a small business owner is technically an entrepreneur. But I think part of what contributed to that is everything about our education system, and oftentimes how we're parented, or maybe even how we're parenting ourselves, is really driving and pushing people towards a career path. Right. It's about finding a role and then getting in that role and moving up. I go from level 1 to level 2, and then maybe I'm a manager, and then it's a manager 2 and a manager 3.
Well, there's a stability to it, right? We like to think that there's some certainty there.
Yeah, it provides clarity, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's helpful in a lot of contexts, but I think I very much kind of got pushed in that direction. And through college, you get into college and it's kind of like, hey, what am I going to major in? And it felt to me like the people who majored in entrepreneurship, and again, this was in the late 90s, they were people who couldn't figure out what it was they wanted to do in life.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was just like, no, I feel like these are things that I'm good at and that I want to build a career around. And so I think that probably contributed to that a little bit. And then I also think being an entrepreneur oftentimes gives people this idea that like, hey, I have to have this really great idea, right? I have to be this like creative genius. Right. I don't really think that's what being an entrepreneur is about. It's almost more like being a Lewis and Clark, an explorer, and just having the willingness to actually go take that journey, even when you don't understand or don't have a clear map or a clear destination in mind, or maybe you end up in a place that's not where you had in mind, but that you're comfortable in that space. And that's part of the reason why builder just resonated with me more than I think entrepreneur, because there were all of these other things that I think are kind of leveled on top of being an entrepreneur that maybe didn't resonate as well as being a builder was.
Yeah. So when I asked you about the moment, like what was the moment that you decided you were going to do it? You were going to step away from corporate. You went to sort of a bigger picture trajectory of realization over time. Even so, there's still a moment where there was a resolution inside yourself. that was, okay, I'm done here. This is done for me and I'm moving forward. What was happening? Do you remember that moment?
So the last kind of corporate role that I had, we had a compliance challenge that we were working through. I don't know, sometimes things just kind of get out of control, right? Like no one's really driving a process or an outcome, and it just kind of takes on a life of its own. And that very much kind of happened in that last scenario. And a couple of times I called my wife up in the middle of the day and was just kind of like, hey, if I quit today, do I have your permission to do that? Like, cause I just feel so trapped in this moment. And she's kind of like, what? That's not who you are. What's happening here? Let's at least talk about this because this is so out of character for who you are. It really just allowed us to start a planning process to say, this is the direction we want to go. Right. I'm not interested in trying to find another role in another company somewhere. And really, it just comes down to how do you, because if you're going to create something, oftentimes you have to take a step back financially, right? Personally, financially. And we needed a plan for that. We had assets that we could sell to kind of help fund our life for a period of time until we could get to some sort of regular income. And you need, especially if you've got a partner in life, to really kind of step back and say like, hey, we have to plan financially to make this happen. And just jumping out into the water without some support financially to make that happen is probably not wise. And so I think that was probably the moment. We needed to be thoughtful about that piece of it. I have 3 kids and they were pretty young at the time. It was one of those things where it's like, hey, we just need to be thoughtful about this.
Oh, I love that. I love that you had direct conversations about it and you faced the hard questions early on. And so there was no rashness, which I guess if you're starting your career in auditing, you're probably not someone prone to rash behavior.
My wife says I totally bait and switched her in the early days because she thought she was getting this like really risk averse. Actually, there's the movie Alone Came Polly, if you remember that. It was like a Ben Stiller. Great movie, very funny. That's who I was at that point in time, was Ben Stiller's character. And again, because I was kind of pushed into this place where that was who I was, but it really wasn't truly who I was, right? It was just me trying to find my place in a corporate environment.
Yeah. There is some benefit though. My first job right out of college was with a startup. Now, it was a pretty well-run startup, and then I went to another startup, and then eventually I had some roles within larger companies, not huge, but larger companies. And there is a benefit. Like, so you being in corporate for 15 years, you got to see how things are done when there are processes in place and there are best practices and that you can learn from out in the world what others are doing. I think that with entrepreneurship, especially if you go into entrepreneurship without any prior work experience to really speak of, then there might not be a value for creating processes, right? They might just be seen as bad instead of helpful. Are you willing to share how many employees you are right now?
Yeah, we have about 40. Well, the interesting thing that you're talking about there is we see this show up a lot in our business because we serve a lot of companies with 1,000 or more employees, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the people on our team have never worked in environments that are that large. Right. And I think sometimes it's hard for them to understand the challenges and the issues that, our customers or the people who are using our product face in a real way. And part of what I feel like I have to do a lot with our team is provide that perspective. This is what this person is experiencing, or like, hey, when we do this thing with our product, this is the reason why we need to invest in this area or to do this thing with our product is because this is how big organizations work. This is their decision-making process. These are the tools that drive people crazy or, provide solutions. And so I have to be the voice of that perspective in our organization. Over time, we've added a few folks who have more of that expertise. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think startups oftentimes attract younger people that don't have a lot of experience in bigger organizations. And I think it's a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, and you can get inured. Is that the right word? Or to the pace
a fancy word.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it means like you become
trained or
trained that, that you're going to switch directions so fast because you're in a startup and you're always switching directions. And at some point, if you're adding a lot of employees and if you're trying to start to scale, right? So there's a lot in the product market fit phase where there's a ton of change, right? You're
Absolutely.
getting whiplash left, right, and center. But then when you begin to scale, the change becomes more about instituting processes, and then they break the more people you add, and then you've got to remake them. Okay, so this journey with Cloverleaf took you a couple years to come to the decision, like, this is the company I want to start. So you're now a number of years in. What was the problem you initially started out to solve? And is that still the same problem you're solving for today, or has that shifted?
I think it really is. I mean, we didn't say like, let's go start an AI coaching company. Like that wasn't what we said. So my co-founder and I, we worked at creative agency. I called it my like corporate rehab because I got to step out of the large structured bureaucratic organizations and step into the smaller, more nimble organization. And we had small teams of designers and creative directors and producers that would be working on 20 different videos at any one time. And these teams were like, if you were working on 20 different projects, you had 20 different teams that you were working with. You might be working with this designer on these 3 projects and this creative director with these 5 projects, these separate, different 5 projects. And so one of the things that really became clear to us was that the success or failure of those projects was more about how people worked together. And you put a designer with a creative director, and it was a 60-second animated video on cloud security would bring a tear to your eye. And then you would put that same designer with a different creative director, and it was just a disaster. And you're like, the common denominator here is really how people work together. And I call it that behavioral layer of how work gets done. And there's a lot that goes into that, like how we process information, how we communicate with each other, how we're resistant to change or how we embrace change. There's just all of these different factors. And it's kind of this hidden thing. You know, people will talk about a really great team experience and they're just kind of like, oh, I got lucky. Or, yeah, I don't know, there was some magic to it. We're like, there has to be more to this than just luck and chance, right? There has to be a rationale and there has to be a process behind this. And, you know, people have written great business books for decades on how to create a really great team and how to be a great leader. And so like all of that knowledge is out there, but the bigger challenge is how do we understand that in the moment? How do we abstract ourselves from the situation if there's conflict or if there's differences of opinion or we're not able to communicate effectively with each other? And the solution that we kind of came to was people need technology, and especially since that's where we're working, is on Zoom calls or in Slack and Teams channels or in email. And we can leverage that technology to help people translate those moments into something that can be productive. And I think that was what we set out to build. We didn't know it would become an AI coaching platform because in 2017, AI wasn't, I mean, obviously it was out there, but it was kind of like these heady things that were happening in research labs somewhere. And in the early days, we started leveraging machine learning, but we weren't going to use the AI label because for larger enterprises, they're too risk averse in 2017, 2018 to bring AI in. And it really has only been in the last year or so that organizations have really truly embraced AI solutions.
Well, they've been
So,
given a mandate to, right? Often from
yeah.
the top. Yeah. Yeah. You've been thinking a lot about AI. You've been working with AI, machine learning for a long time. As your company has moved deeper into incorporating AI into the product, what are you still trying to protect about the human side? Like, where does AI
Yeah.
work in what you're doing and where doesn't it work in what you're doing?
Our vision all along was to not be an easy button because part of how we're applying AI is in interpersonal interactions. And we're in the learning and development space, right? So just creating a shortcut to an answer, which I think oftentimes is how people are using AI in a lot of places, doesn't actually work for humans that are trying to communicate effectively with each other, or understanding why we can't motivate or encourage someone to do something that we need either for the team or for the organization. And so our approach from day one wasn't to provide an easy button, something that would just write that email for you or that would just deliver that hard performance feedback or one-on-one. And instead, we needed to coach and train and develop people to do that effectively. One, to even understand that, hey, maybe I need to stop and reflect on this conversation that I'm about to have before I just jump headlong into it.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is value in understanding, seeking, being curious and seeking to understand first before you just barf your ideas all
Right.
over the team or all over the person that you're working with. And so that really has just been a core tenet of ours from very early on, and that hasn't changed. So it's more about how do we leverage AI to improve human relationships. It happens to be in the workplace, which is where we're focused. But it's really much more about how do we leverage the technology to improve those work relationships and get better outcomes and have better, more effective people in the roles and in the teams that they're a part of.
Yeah. What I like about Cloverleaf is, so yes, there are what you were talking about. You didn't use the phrase, but I've heard the phrase used in context to Cloverleaf, micro moments of learning, right?
Yeah.
Micro moments of learning about myself, learning about people I work with, and they can be delivered via like in a textual context, or I can go and use your Discover engine to put in a query, the Discover engine about a particular person or about our dynamic and
Yeah.
find out, get some ideas for how I might approach it. But I also really love the team dashboard, the visualization of the assessments, right? So your platform is not a singular personality assessment. It's a multiple assessment platform. So in the team dashboard view, you can easily see what the team layout is on, let's say, a disc or an Enneagram or the 16 types. And I think that both are necessary, the visual component and the textual, I can read about it, right? The information gathering.
Yeah.
And I know you make suggestions. There's a feature in the product that gives a facilitation script for how a team leader might be able to take 10 minutes in a meeting, a regular team meeting, if they wanted to, and dive into Cloverleaf and have the team come away with an insight. But really, at the end of the day, the technology gives people insights. But in order for those insights to actually turn into behavior change, there needs to be something in the real world that happens, right? A dialogue, team conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything that we're doing is about getting people to act in the right ways at the right times. And when I say in the right ways, a good example might be just providing recognition. People need recognition and they need it in different ways. If you're a shout it from the mountaintops kind of person, that's only going to work for a segment of your team or your organization. And so how do we, one, again, give you that moment to pause and say, oh yeah, I should recognize that person for that thing. Or, hey, that contribution that they made is this really unique thing that only they bring to the team. So it's not either all positive or all negative. We're trying to identify or highlight those places where blind spots or where certain strategies can be ineffective,
Mm-hmm.
either at a team or group level or in an individual one-on-one interaction. But yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, people have to act. And I think that's the same with traditional human coaching, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're seeing a therapist and feel like you just go and you complain about the same things every single time and you're not doing anything different, then yeah,
Nothing
you're
changes.
probably not going to see growth.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is, and I think this is a big part of why we've built the product the way we built it, is really trying to intersect those moments, because I think so much of learning and development inside the organization is like, hey, we've got to remove you from your day-to-day work and we're going to send you through this class, or you're going to sit and consume some content for an hour. And one, it takes you out of the flow of your work. And I think with the focus on productivity and performance right now, that's not exactly what senior leaders want to hear. That like, oh, we've
Mm-hmm.
got to stop working for a day. So that's always a challenge. And then I think the other piece of it is if you're removing yourself from your work to learn something, when you go back into your work, what are the chances that you're actually remembering that mental model? And then how do you translate that for the specific person or the specific situation that you're in? Even just by translating those models into specific strategies and then giving it to people around the points in time where they're interacting with each other increases the odds that people will actually act on it. And I think that's the biggest thing, because if you did a classroom effort, you brought 30 managers or leaders together and you spent all day teaching them situational leadership or critical conversations or, fill in the blank, right? Like that's what we do. And what are the chances that people actually act on those things when they get back into their work the following Monday? They're about to have that conversation. It's kind of like, okay, I remember parts of this model and there's some language here that could be helpful, but I'm very likely to still do the same things that I did before that created some of that conflict.
Well, especially if we're under pressure, right? So when we're
Right.
under pressure and under stress, we go to the easiest, the most familiar behavior,
The most
right?
instinctual. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about you and what you've learned. So you're co-founder and CEO. How has this journey as a builder outside of corporate changed you? Or what have you learned about yourself?
I'm probably not the best at introspection. So this is hard for me to talk about myself. I think some of the things that I've learned is, one, it really does take a village to build anything. And building a technology and a company that is all about people working together, I understood that. And I placed a high value on working together. Like our mission and vision statement is to unleash people to do their best work. So that's the mission. And then the vision is every team is a thriving team. So the underlying statement there is like the only way we can do our best work is through teams, through each other, like working together and collaborating. And so that's the value system that I'm coming from. So I clearly understood that it took a village, but I don't think I understood how much of a village, right? Because it's not just the people that you hire, but it's the people you partner with. It's the business models that you create and aligning incentives. We have investors. And how do you not only communicate that vision to them, but keep them engaged in that vision in a way that has them leveraging things beyond just capital or dollars, but are able to bring connections that are meaningful and valuable into the business. So there's this whole like sphere of, I would say, influencers, right, to the process of building a business that is honestly just as important as the team that you have that is on payroll. So that's been a really, I think, insightful part of building this business.
So you talk about you having to learn how to communicate with them and keep them engaged. And the stakeholder groups you identified are more like external or adjacent stakeholder groups rather than the employee base, right? Which I'm sure there are
Yeah.
some learnings there. But first of all, thank you for that moment of acknowledging the challenge that you have about introspection. Thank you for surfacing that. I honor you for
Yeah.
that. So, what has been hard for you? What's been the most annoying or frustrating thing about learning how to be effective in communicating with these stakeholder groups?
You have to have the vision. You have to get people excited about that vision. But then the thing that I don't think I understood, and this goes for all of those constituents, whether it's investors or it's partners or it's your employees, is you have to repeat that vision over and over and over again. And it's not just repeating the vision, but it's the how we're going to achieve that vision. Probably for the first 4 to 5 years, I found that very, very frustrating. Kind of the same level of frustration that I had when I worked in corporate. And it was kind of like you had to go get 18 people to agree to something to actually make a decision. Yeah, it was probably at the same level of frustration. And talked with a kind of a coach, mentor. I was expressing frustration on one of those scenarios where I was having to repeat myself over and over again. And he said, "Oh, you thought your role was chief executive officer, but your actual role is chief repeating officer." And like, this is just what you have to do is remind people over and over and over again, even basic things about the vision. Even the things that you've been saying for 5 years, right? You still have to repeat those things. And once it kind of shifted from this thing that felt frustrating and like, why aren't people either getting it or why do I have to remind them, to this like, oh, to be successful in this role, this is a really important part of being a CEO. And I think that was a really important mindset shift to see this thing that was frustrating as not something that's frustrating, but it actually became something that was like, oh, I can work on that, and I can develop that, and I can also have a different mindset when I'm in those moments where I'm repeating some aspect.
And so how does that feel differently to you now? Do you have more fun with it and experiment with changing how you say something, or how do you approach it now?
I don't know that I would say I had more fun with it because, I mean, communication, it's a hard thing, right? How do you say things in the ways that people need it communicated to them? Some people are visual, some people like stories. Like in our business, we serve 3 different constituents. We serve the like HR, L&D, talent management leader. We serve employees. And when I say employees, I mean like frontline employees, right? Who maybe didn't have a say in whether or not they're using this product. And they were invited to something that they had no context to. And all of a sudden it's there. And then there's like managers and leaders in the organization. And even just thinking about how you communicate the value of different parts of our product or feature or capability and what that can do for them and the specific problems that they're facing is a challenge. So, I mean, communication overall, I think is really, really important, but I wouldn't say I have fun with it. It's like something that we've struggled through over the years. Like it's really more about the mindset shift, and I'm not frustrated by it anymore. And I don't see it as an impediment to success, but instead I'm kind of like, oh, this is a moment where communication is important. And who is the audience? What do they want? I think I'm probably more proactive about it. And I would hope I'm more effective at it.
Well, it sounds like you've certainly put effort into it and thoughtfulness and intentionality. And I mean, that's all you can ask of yourself, right? Is like to try to do it. Again and again and again and again. You know, it takes work. I recently heard someone say, and this really resonated with me, it's not necessarily about being good at having difficult conversations. And, you know, communication is not all just difficult conversations, but it's not necessarily about being good at difficult conversations. And you can kind of say this with communication. It's either you're someone who does have difficult conversations or you're someone who doesn't, right? Yeah. And so you're either someone who is thoughtful about communicating and at least put some effort into thinking about tailoring the message for the audience so that they can receive it better. Or you're someone who doesn't, who's just going to, I am who I am and I'm not going to change, and they're just going to have to live with it.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing too is like as you grow a business, you have to have hard conversations all day, every day, right? You're just kind of forced into it because somebody's got to make a decision. Somebody's got to deliver that hard thing, whether it's an employment decision or it's an investment decision that we're making internally or strategy shift. Like these are things that someone's not going to be happy with. I think the other piece of it is you need reps. And the more reps you get, and I think in a lot of cases, and this comes back a little bit to some of the stuff that was in corporate bravery, I think a lot of times people not only avoid those situations, but they just have built a life where they aren't forced into those difficult scenarios. Like for me, one of the things early on when we were starting Cloverleaf is I had never fundraised before. And honestly, I'd never had a direct front-facing sales role, and I'd never fundraised before. And one of the things that was really stark for me in the early days of fundraising and starting the business was I spent 15 years building a life where I didn't have to face rejection much. And suddenly I was thrust into this place where I was getting rejected 20 times a day. And it felt soul crushing, you know, initially. And then it was just kind of like, oh, I got used to it. You know, I kind of was able to frame the disappointment. I was able to, I think, understand better too that no's weren't an indictment on our idea or our business or me as a leader or as a person, but that it just was a function. And again, one of the things that really helped me process some of that stuff in the early days was seeing that on average, when people raise, it takes about anywhere from 50 to 100 no's to get a single yes. And once you see that, oh no, that's just a process, again, the mindset piece is huge. because once I was shifting that from this is about me, this is an indictment on our ideas or the belief in a direction, and this is just part of the process, and this is what you have to do to get to a yes, then it's kind of like, oh, okay, I can lean into that more now. And once you get the reps on those things, you get better and better at it. And I would hope that if you're doing anything that many times, you do get better at it. But oftentimes it's not even about getting better at it. It's just about, I think, better processing and better mindsets going into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What, if anything, feels left unsaid right now that you want to make sure you get to say?
Gosh, I mean, that's a really big open-ended question.
What Enneagram type are you?
I'm an 8, Enneagram 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's like the first thing that comes to your mind when I ask that question?
First thing that came to my mind is there anything that people wouldn't understand about our business after having listened to this that maybe they would be curious about? Then I was also like, was there higher level theory, strategy kind of things that I feel like I would want to throw out there or impart? But there wasn't a single thought or idea.
Yeah.
I just wanted to have a conversation.
It strikes me that your story of embracing your builder and being willing to take the risk to step away from the illusion of safety that corporate might give into being an independent builder, going out and fundraising, hiring these folks that are now on your payroll, depending on you, right? And also with the product that you're building, there's an evolution into greater authenticity or greater alignment with who you truly feel you are. What piece of advice would you have for someone who is having that internal battle of like, this doesn't really feel like me. I have this vision for myself, but I don't know how to get there, or I'm fearful.
I think current generations entering the workforce probably have less of an issue than Gen X, baby boom, maybe even older millennials might have, because I do think it's much more widely accepted that you have more opportunities. You might change jobs, companies, or roles inside the same company much more frequently, and that career pathing can be side to side. You know, like that breadth of experience is just as valuable as moving up the ladder, so to speak. And I think historically, folks in that Gen X baby boom generation, especially, it was culturally just kind of driven into our mind and our psyche about like, you know, hey, you get this job, you stay on this path and you keep doing a good job and good things will happen. I think it's much more widely accepted now that actually there's value in having those different experiences and wanting to try different things that maybe bring us outside of our comfort zone. There's a ton of influencers on TikTok and, you know, all the different social channels that are about hacking your way to growth. So there's this culture now that is much more, I think, growth minded and growth focused. Sometimes that can be a negative thing because it's kind of like growth for growth's sake and not actually going to a new place with any of that newfound wisdom and experience. I think culturally, it's a much safer place to try things now. And I'm really excited about that. I think that's amazing. That part alone goes a long way towards helping people. You know, I've got 3 teenagers, oldest of which is about to start college in the fall. And I just watched the stress and anxiety in their lives thinking about career paths and what do I want to major in. And there's still this mindset that is these decisions that I'm making here are going to define the rest of my life. And I think the biggest thing is that's just not the case. And I think there are more opportunities for people today to switch and shift than there ever have been. And honestly, 20, 30 years ago, the cost to switch, like the time it took to learn new things and get to a new place of proficiency was much longer and much costlier. And today that is not the case. You can learn quickly. You have opportunities to experience things that were not there 20 or 30 years ago. And I think because of that, people should not be afraid to just make the leap and invest in themselves and invest in trying things that could be an unlock for them in really amazing ways. Almost every person that we've hired, it's not every person, but a very high percentage of our employees have completely switched careers. Like our head of engineering was an architect. And I know Heidi, who works with you on the customer success side, she was in construction accounting for almost 10 years. We have so many people who have switched gears and gone a completely different path in their career. And I love that because you're bringing these concepts from these different fields and disciplines, and it just makes your contributions so much more valuable.
Yeah, that's a great point, that the switching costs are lower now than they were from a getting up to speed perspective, how
Yeah.
long it would take. It does occur to me, though, that the willingness to feel discomfort and the the need for mindset shifts still exists.
Oh,
So,
I
so
think it's greater than it's ever been.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Because I watch my Gen Zers in my family. They'll do anything to avoid a uncomfortable, difficult, seemingly problematic situation. And my wife and I, we've talked regularly about like our primary role of raising these kids at this stage is really about pushing them into uncomfortable situations as much as we can because they have to build that resilience now
Hmm. Hmm.
before they get into a place where they haven't had a chance to practice those things and build that muscle. But it's going to be critical to their success. And I think
Hmm.
more so today than it's
Hmm.
ever been because of the speed at which everything's coming at us in technology innovation and political unrest and all of the things. And
Yeah.
so I think if they're going to be successful as adults, then the biggest challenge they're going to be faced with is that resiliency piece.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take that advice for myself too. Let's get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, Darrin, thank you so much for your time today. Where do you want people to go that have just listened and they want to learn more about you or Cloverleaf? Where do you want them to go?
Yeah, so cloverleaf.me is our website. So .me is an important piece. So cloverleaf.com doesn't take you anywhere. It's like cold storage company that owns it and won't
Give
talk
it
to me
up.
about selling selling the domain name. Trust me, I would love it. Yeah, cloverleaf.me. You can find anything that you need there. Definitely follow us on LinkedIn. We're all very active, so you can direct message us through LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you. And I'll put everything in the show notes.
Great. Thanks,
All
Kelly.
right. Thanks, Darrin. Thanks for tuning into Life from Within. Follow, like, and subscribe to catch future episodes. You know, I think what Darrin and his team are building over at Cloverleaf is pretty cool, so go check it out. Are you or your team at an inflection point? Are you feeling disoriented and unsure about the way forward? I can help. Go to kellydwyer.co and reach out. We can have a conversation and figure out a plan to get you reoriented and engaged in your next evolution. Catch you next time on Life from Within.